Hello everyone, my name is Dan from Dan's Test Prep. Today we're going to go over Tutor Tuesday and focus on the digital SAT. Specifically, we're going to be going over reading and writing questions and math questions from the new digital SAT format. So let's just jump right into it. Our first question looks like a nice little reading question. It says, while many video game creators strive to make their graphics ever more blank, others look to the past, developing titles with visuals inspired by 8-bit games of the 1980s and 1990s. Which choice completes the text so that it conforms to the conventions of standard English? Well, I see the word while here. While indicates that we're probably going to have a dependent clause at the beginning of this sentence here. And so when we have a dependent clause starting off a sentence, we're going to want some kind of punctuation like a comma to separate it from the independent clause that's going to follow. So I'm going to rule out choice A and B, which don't have that punctuation. And then the word while is going to be redundant with the word but. So looking at between C and D, I'm going to go with C because the word but and while it's unnecessary to put both, basically. Okay. Our next question is asking about the y-intercept of this line. This one shouldn't be too bad. I think most of you guys can get this right away. Y-intercept of this line is just going to be where it intercepts the y-axis, which looks to be at x equals 0, y equals 8. So in ordered pair form, that's going to be answer choice D. Okay, what have we got next? Yawn contagion. Okay, first let's read this question statement. Which choice best describes the function of the first sentence in a text as a whole? Basically, why did we put that first sentence in there? What purpose does it serve? It says yawn contagion occurs when one individual yawns in response to another's yawn. Seems like it's just introducing a topic. Let's keep reading. Studies of this behavior. Okay, then we talk about some studies of this behavior. Let's just skimming this. We see description of their study and what the researchers reported from that study. So without even looking at the answers, I'm thinking this is just introducing some kind of topic. And looking between these ones, it defines a phenomenon that's discussed in a text. I do see that, yeah. Let's keep reading. It introduces a problem. It does introduce something, but it's not necessarily a problem. It makes a claim that is challenged. No, that wasn't challenged. It was supported by these studies. And it presents a hypothesis that is evaluated. No, it looks like it's presenting a fact. So, yeah, the best choice here is going to be answer choice A. We're defining a phenomenon that is discussed later on in the text. All right, what have we got next? Nice little math question. In the given system of equations, h is a constant. If the system has no solution, what is the value of h? No solution. Okay. Well, I see I have two equations here, right? It's a system of equations. A system of equations has no solution when the two lines are parallel to each other. In order for them to be parallel to each other, I want the same slope. Same slope. So what I want to do here is probably convert it into matching form for both equations. I will move the 5 over to the other side and move the negative 9y over. So we get 4x minus 5 on that top equation equals 18y. Then notice that matches pretty similarly to the bottom equation. If I just flip the structure of the bottom equation, it's hy equals 4x plus 2. Now, in order for the slopes to be the same here, I could convert it into slope-intercept form. That would be fine. But even from here, I can see that if I want the slopes to be the same, I want the same coefficients on my x and on my y. And if I want to match those coefficients up, all I need to do is set h equals to 18, and that'll give us the correct answer. Feel free to move this into slope-intercept form to check, but you'll get something like y equals 4 over 18x plus 2 or minus 5, and that will give you the same exact slope. Okay, next one is another nice little math question. Okay, Robert rented a truck to transport materials he purchased from a hardware store. He was charged initial fee of $20 plus an additional 70 cents per mile. If the truck was driven 38 miles, what was the total amount that Robert was charged? Well, that's going to be pretty simple. $20 is the initial fee, then it's 0.70 per mile times 38 miles. So in total, that's 20 plus 26.60, which if we sum all that up, we get $46.60. That's answer choice A. Okay, here we have another reading question. It looks a bit harder than some of the previous ones, but we can still go through it. We're asked to find which of the following findings from the answer choices, if true, would most directly support the researcher's hypothesis. Okay, so first, we need to figure out what their hypothesis is. And their hypothesis, it says researchers hypothesized that a decline in the population of dusky sharks near the mid-Atlantic coast led to a decline in the population of eastern oysters in the region. Okay, decline in dusky sharks. Let me write it like this. Decline in dusky sharks led to a decline in the oysters. This is our hypothesis. Some more information. Dusky sharks do not typically consume eastern oysters, but do consume cow nose rays, which are the main predators of oysters. So if I drew that out, it's kind of like the dusky sharks are eating the cow nose rays, which eat the oysters. So I guess it could make sense that if this population decreased, this population would increase, and then they would eat more of the oysters, so the oysters would decrease as well. But let's see if we can find any kind of logic that will help support that. Declines in the regional abundance of dusky shark's prey other than cow nose rays are associated with regional declines in dusky shark abundance. I mean, this doesn't really relate to the main claim, which is dealing with the dusky sharks and the oysters and the cow nose rays. We don't have any information on their prey other than cow nose rays, so I wouldn't really go with this one. Eastern oyster abundance tends to be greater in areas with both dusky sharks and cow nose rays than in areas with only dusky sharks. That would actually be the opposite, right? If there's an abundance of those rays, then we'd expect the oysters to be actually less abundant. Consumption of oysters by rays in the region substantially increased before the regional decline in dusky shark abundance began. No, that wouldn't really support the idea or this relationship that we set out right here. Cow nose rays have increased in regional abundance as dusky sharks have decreased in regional abundance. Yeah, that makes sense. If these rays went up in population as the sharks went down, then those rays are going to be more abundant and eating the oysters more. So that's kind of like how a decrease in these sharks will lead to a decrease in the oysters, sort of indirectly. Okay. Pretty tricky, but we got through that all right. Next question. In order to prevent non-native fish species from moving freely between the Mediterranean and Red Seas, marine biologist Bellegalil has proposed that a saline lock system be installed along the Suez Canal in Egypt's Great Bitter Lakes. The lock would increase the salinity of the lakes and blank a natural barrier of water most marine creatures would be unable to cross. Which choice completes the text so that it conforms to the conventions of standard English? Okay, so all these answers are just a form of the verb create. So I'm going to look at the verb tense of all the other verbs in that corresponding sentence to get my clue. It says the lock would increase the salinity of the lakes and blank a natural, either creates a natural barrier, creating, or created. And just looking at the word increase, I'm going to go with create as well, right? If it said maybe increases, then I could go with creates, but it has to match with all the other verbs. We can't mix and match. Creating is the action of doing so in real time, so not that either. Created means it's already happened, but we say would increase, as in it's something that would hypothetically happen. And so we'd want would create as well. Okay. Our next question here. In the xy plane, the graph of the equation above is a circle. And luckily for you guys, you don't have to watch me struggle to draw that circle. Point P is on the circle and has coordinates 10, -5. Okay, let's stop right there and just draw out some characteristics of this circle. I see it's got a center at 6, -5, and the radius is equal to 4, since this is our squared term. 6, -5, that's going to be right here as the center of the circle, meaning that the axes look sort of like this. Hold on. Like this. Okay, and then we have point P is on the circle with 10, -5. That's just at one end of the radius. PQ is a diameter of the circle. What are the coordinates of point Q? Well, if this is point P, I know that it has to pass through the center of the circle in order to become a diameter. So it would pass through like right through here and keep going to point Q. By that logic, we just crossed the radius, but in the opposite direction. So we'd reduce our x by another 4 units to get to 2, -5. Not too bad if you draw it out. A few more problems here for you guys. This one is another reading question conforming to the standards of or conventions of standard English. In 1943, well, actually, let me skip that one. Let me see the second sentence first. Hopper's subsequent career would involve more than just blank as a pioneering computer programmer. Hopper would help usher in the digital age. Okay. I read that through as one sentence, but it felt a little bit weird because we said Hopper in the beginning of the sentence and we said Hopper in the next part of the sentence. I don't think that we would just put a bunch of commas here because it would create a comma splice just leading through those ideas. Where instead we want more of like a full stop. So I'm looking at this period here. Hopper's subsequent career would involve more than just equations, period, though, as a pioneering computer programmer. But that sounds a little bit weird to me as well. So maybe let's look at some other punctuation. Hopper's subsequent career would involve more than just equations, though. That could make sense, right? Because if I'm looking at this first sentence, it says Grace Hopper was recruited by the military to help solve complex equations. Then we can say her career would involve more than just equations, though. Sort of that contrast there. Let's look at some of the other answer choices as well. More than just equations, comma, though, comma. Yeah, we said we didn't want B or a bunch of commas here because it would create a comma splice. We'd want more of like a more definitive stop here, which a colon could give us. And then D doesn't have any punctuation at all. Hopper's subsequent career would involve more than just equations, though. It just doesn't really flow that well. So definitely going to go with A for this one. Her career would involve more than just equations, though. The comma sets apart this first part of the sentence from the adverb, though. Then we can put a colon here that will allow us to put another part of the sentence and emphasize what came before it. So this is definitely a good relation to have here. Okay. Next one looks like a pretty tricky math question, but I'll show you guys how you can do this pretty formulaically. What I noticed right away is that these equations are pretty similar. In fact, if I multiply this top equation all by 5, it just becomes the bottom equation, right? 5 times 2 is 10x, 5 times 3 is 15, 5 times 7 is 35. So these are the same equation. Let's just focus on one of the equations then. And I'm going to try to get it into y equals mx plus b form to make it a little bit easier for us to analyze. So this one would be 3y equals negative 2x plus 7, which I can also divide by 3 to get y equals negative 2 thirds x plus 7 thirds. Then I want to find which, for each real number r, which of the following points lies on the graph of each equation in the xy plane for the given system. Well, I can literally these are just xy coordinate pairs, right? X comma y, x comma y, all of these are x comma y. So I can plug them in and see if any of them give me a good result. For example, this x coordinate I can plug into this equation and see if I get this y coordinate out. So y equals negative 2 thirds times r over 5 plus 7 thirds. That's the same thing as negative 2 over 15 r minus 14 thirds plus 7 thirds. Well, right away I see that that isn't really going to match the slope that we see here in the y coordinate. So I'm going to cross this one out for that reason. We can move on to the next one and try that one. That's going to be y equals negative 2 thirds. Instead of x, we'll put in this coordinate, which is negative 3r over 2 plus 7 halves. And then we need the constant over there, so plus 7 thirds. That's y equals negative 2 thirds times negative 3r over 2 is going to be, looks like just r. And a negative 2 thirds times 7 halves is going to be minus 7 thirds. And then plus 7 thirds those will cancel. And so we're left with y equals r. So if x equals this, y equals r, that's actually true. And so we've got our answer for this one right here. Looks like we've got, okay, a few more questions here. This one is saying in the given pair of equations, a and b are constants. The graph of this pair of equations is a pair of perpendicular lines. Which of the following pairs of equations also represents a pair of perpendicular lines? Interesting. Well, perpendicular lines means the slopes. So in order for two lines to be perpendicular, we need the slope to be negative reciprocal of the other one. In other words, let me convert this into y equals mx plus b form to make it a little bit easier. That's going to be 7y is equal to negative 5x plus 1. Y equals negative 5 over 7x plus 1 over 7. Down here, we get by equals negative ax plus 1, or y equals negative a over b plus 1 over b. So we have our two equations in y equals form. Makes it a little bit easier to deal with. And if I want these two to be perpendicular, then I know that we want the slopes to be negative reciprocals of each other. That would mean the slope of negative 5 over 7 is equal to the negative reciprocal of this slope, which is B over A, right? I flipped it and negated it. So we want this relationship to be true. We're going to look for that. Again, we can test each of our answer choices. That's a pretty formulaic way of doing it. So this one, for example, would be y equals negative 10 over 7x plus 1 over 7. This would be y equals negative, or this would be y equals a over 2b plus 1 over 2b. Comparing those slopes, we'd get negative 10 over 7. And let's check if this is the negative reciprocal, negative 2b over a. That looks like, if we divide everything by 2, we get negative 5 over 7 is equal to negative b over a. So close, but there's an extra negative here that we see that's not in this one. But B looks pretty promising. It's the same thing, but with a different sign. So let's test answer choice B. That's y equals negative 10 over 7x plus 1 over 7. That's y equals negative a over 2bx plus 1 over 2b. Comparing those slopes, negative 10 over 7. And let's take the negative reciprocal of this slope, 2b over a. Divide everything by 2, we get negative 5 over 7 is equal to b over a. And that's exactly the right relationship that we saw from the original equations. So definitely this is also a pair of perpendicular lines. Next one's not too bad if you're familiar with your standard equation of the circle. Diameter of the circle in this plane, well, the standard equation of your circle is going to be x minus h squared plus y minus k squared plus r squared, where h comma k is the center of your circle. Or sorry, this is equals to r squared. And r squared is your radius term squared. If the radius squared is equal to 16, then square root that to get the radius equals 4, which is not the answer, of course, because we're asked to find a diameter. Diameter is twice the radius, which is going to be 2 times 4, or 8. Okay, a few more questions here. Each face of a fair 14-sided die is labeled with a number 1 through 14, with a different number appearing on each face. If the die is rolled one time, what is the probability of rolling a 2? Actually, if the die is rolled one time, what's the probability of rolling any number 1 through 14? Because it's a fair 14-sided die. The probability of getting any number is actually just 1 over 14. That includes getting a 2. Could have asked, what is the probability of rolling a 5 or a 7 or a 14? It's still a 1 in 14 chance because there's one face that has a 2 out of the 14 faces. 23 says, a certain town has an area of 4.36 square miles. What is the area in square yards of this town? Okay, let's start with the 4.36 miles squared. And we have a conversion factor that's actually given. 1 mile is 1760 yards. 1760 yards in a mile. If you multiply this together, you'd get something like 7674. But it would be a mistake to choose this answer choice right away. Because notice that we didn't actually cancel out our square miles. We just converted once. And area is a two-dimensional thing, which means we have to convert by this scale factor twice. So I'm going to multiply again by that scale factor, 1760 yards per mile, because we want to capture both the length and the width of this area. We want to convert both or scale both aspects that make up the area. And if we multiply this together, we're going to get about 13,505,536, which is answer choice D. And the last question that I've got for you guys is a pretty tricky little math question. It says, for this exponential function f, the value f of 1 is k, where k is a constant. Which of the following equivalent forms of the function f shows the value of k as the coefficient or the base? What does that even mean? Well, that basically means when we evaluate the function, f of x for an exponential function is usually something like a times b to the x, right? We have an initial value, then we have our growth rate, and we have our x, which is just like the current term that we're on, or maybe the time that we're at. So if we evaluate f of 1, that's just saying let's plug in x equals 1 into our equation. And that's a times b to the first power. Now we can actually get this f, we can basically get the first function evaluation to appear in our function definition, but we have to do a little bit of manipulation to get this value to actually show up. If we want the original function f of x to capture this function value, a times b, we need to do something like a times b to the first power times b to the power x minus 1. Because notice, b to the x and b times b to the x minus 1, that's going to be the same thing. Using our exponent rules, if we multiply these two bases together, the same base, we can add the exponents together. So using this way of rewriting it, it's a pretty clever way to rewrite it, because we can basically take the original function equation and rewrite it such that the f of 1 value pops out as a constant right here. And we don't actually change any value of the function, because it's still equivalent to b to the x, because we subtracted a copy of b right here, whereas we added it right here. Now, they don't exactly tell us what f of 1 is equal to. They just say k. But I know that this would evaluate out to a constant, like they said. So I'll look for something that has a constant times b to the x minus 1. And that looks like exactly answer choice C. So this would probably be our f of 1 value. And then we have the growth rate to the power x minus 1. Remember, we want to encapsulate the fact that we evaluated the function. We want to get that value to appear, but we also want to keep this function equivalent to its original form. So that's why we subtracted a copy of b here. Okay, that's all I got for you guys. Hopefully that was helpful. Don't forget, I have an Explore page where I have a weekly SAT newsletter, I have more free SAT tips, and all my Tutor Tuesday recordings. So definitely sign up for that if you're interested in boosting your score on these tests. See you guys next week.